The wagon wheels groaned against the frozen mud as Eleanor McKenna guided her tired mare along the narrow mountain trail. March in the Sierra Nevada was unforgiving. Snow still clung to the pine branches overhead, and the late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the forest. She pulled her wool cloak tighter, though the chill that ran through her had little to do with the weather. Behind her, 2 worn leather cases held everything she owned in this world: a few dresses, some books, teaching supplies, and a carefully wrapped daguerreotype she never looked at anymore. The letter from the Timber Rock School Board crinkled in her pocket. Her salvation, perhaps, or merely another temporary refuge. She'd been riding since dawn, stopping only to water the mare and eat a few bites of hardtack. The stagecoach driver in Sacramento had warned her about this last stretch of road. Ain't nothing out there but timbermen and their families. Miss, you sure you want to go all that way alone? She was sure. She had to be. As the trees began to thin, Eleanor caught her first glimpse of Timber Rock. The town sprawled across a small valley like a wound in the wilderness. Unpainted buildings clustered around a single muddy main street, smoke rising from chimneys into the gray sky. A church steeple stood at one end, its bell tower the tallest structure for miles. At the other end, she could make out the schoolhouse, its whitewashed walls standing out like a beacon of civilization in this rough place. The mare's hooves squelched through the spring mud as they descended into town. Eyes followed her progress from doorways and windows, the curious stares of people who rarely saw strangers, especially women traveling alone. Eleanor kept her gaze fixed ahead, her gloved hands steady on the reins despite the trembling in her chest. The boarding house sat on Main Street, a 2-story building with peeling paint and a crooked sign that read, Mrs. Pritchard's Rooms, weekly rates available. Eleanor tied her mare to the hitching post and climbed the steps, her traveling dress heavy with mud at the hem. The door swung open before she could knock. A stout woman in her 50s stood there, arms crossed over her ample bosom, sharp eyes taking in every detail of Eleanor's appearance. "You'd be the new schoolteacher." "Mrs." Pritchard stated rather than asked. "From back east." "Yes, ma'am. Eleanor McKenna, from Boston." The older woman snorted. "Boston? Might as well be from the moon, far as folks here are concerned." She stepped aside. "Well, don't stand there letting all the heat out. Come in, come in." The parlor smelled of lye soap and boiled cabbage. Eleanor followed Mrs. Pritchard up narrow stairs that creaked with every step. Rent's due weekly, every Sunday after church. No men in the rooms, no liquor, no loud noises after 9 o'clock. Breakfast is at 6, dinner at noon if you're here for it. You'll be taking the teacher's house soon enough, but that needs fixing first." "The teacher's house?" "Small place, behind the schoolhouse. Hasn't been lived in for near 2 years. Not since the last teacher left." "Mrs." Pritchard pushed open a door at the end of the hall. "This'll do you for now." The room was sparse but clean, a narrow bed with a faded quilt, a washstand with a chipped basin, 1 chair, and hooks on the wall for clothes. Eleanor set down her cases and moved to the window. From here she could see the schoolhouse, and beyond it, the endless forest stretching to the mountains. "Thank you, Mrs. Pritchard. This will be fine." The landlady lingered in the doorway. "Where'd you say you taught before?" Eleanor had practiced this answer. "A small academy outside Boston. I wanted to see the frontier before I got too old for adventure." Mrs. Pritchard's laugh was harsh as winter wind. "Adventure? That what you call it?" She shook her head. "Dinner's in an hour. Don't be late." Alone at last. Eleanor sank onto the bed. She pulled off her gloves and rubbed her hands together, noting the ink stains on her fingers that marked her as a teacher. No other marks showed. She'd made sure of that, keeping her sleeves buttoned tight, her collar high, after washing her face and changing her mud-stained dress for a clean one. Eleanor ventured downstairs. The dining room held one long table where several boarders had already gathered. Conversations died as she entered. "Gentlemen," Mrs. Pritchard announced, "this is Miss McKenna, the new schoolmarm. You'll mind your manners or find somewhere else to take your meals." Eleanor took the offered seat, aware of the eyes upon her. A young man with sawdust in his hair grinned at her. An older fellow with missing teeth nodded politely. At the far end, a dark-haired man in work clothes didn't look up from his plate. Father Miguel arrived as the stew was being served, a thin man with kind eyes who introduced himself as the pastor of St. Catherine's, the only church in town. "Welcome, Miss McKenna. The children have been without proper schooling for too long. We're blessed to have you." "Thank you, Father. I look forward to meeting them. Wild as mountain cats, some of them." "Mrs." Pritchard warned. "The Garrett boys especially. Their mother died last winter, and their father works the mill dawn to dusk." Father Miguel smiled gently. "They're good children at heart. They simply need guidance." After dinner, Eleanor excused herself and stepped outside. The sun had set, leaving the town in blue twilight. She walked to the schoolhouse, testing the door, locked, but she peered through the windows. Rows of benches, a pot-bellied stove, a chalkboard at the front. Tomorrow she would get the key and begin preparing. "It needs work." The deep voice startled her. She spun around to find a man standing in the shadows, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that needed cutting. She recognized him from dinner, the one who hadn't looked up. "I'm sorry." "The schoolhouse, and the teacher's house behind it. Both need work before they're fit to use." He stepped into the fading light, and she could see his face better, weathered, with lines around gray eyes that spoke of hardship. "Thatcher Reed. I'm the blacksmith. Eleanor McKenna. I know who you are." His tone was flat, neither welcoming nor hostile. "Mrs. Pritchard sent word you'd need the repairs done. I'll start on the house tomorrow." "Thank you, Mr. Reed." He studied her for a long moment, those gray eyes seeming to see too much. "You're not the first teacher to come out from the East. The others didn't last long. Perhaps I'm different. Perhaps." He touched the brim of his hat. "Evening, Miss McKenna." She watched him walk away, his stride long and purposeful. There was something about him that unsettled her, not threatening exactly, but watchful, careful, like a man who'd learned not to trust easily. Back in her room, Eleanor unpacked her few belongings. At the bottom of the second case, wrapped in an old petticoat, was a small leather journal. She sat at the window and opened it to a blank page, then dipped her pen in ink. March 15th, 1885. "Arrived in Timber Rock today. It is as remote as I'd hoped. One road in, surrounded by forest and mountains. The people seem wary, but not unkind. Tomorrow I'll see the schoolhouse properly and meet with the school board. I must remember to keep my sleeves down, my past buried. This is my chance to begin again." She paused, pen hovering over the paper. From her window, she could see lights in the buildings along Main Street. Somewhere, a dog barked. In the distance, a sawmill whistle announced the end of the evening shift. "There is a blacksmith here, Thatcher Reed. Something in his manner suggests he sees more than others. I must be careful." Eleanor closed the journal and held it for a moment before hiding it beneath her underthings in the drawer. Then she took out a letter, worn from folding and unfolding. The ink faded. She didn't need to read it. She knew every word by heart. "You can run, but you cannot hide forever. What you are is marked upon you. You belong to us, and we will find you." She struck a match and held it to the corner of the paper. The flame caught, consuming the threat, turning it to ash. She dropped the burning remnants into the wash basin and watched them curl into nothing. "Not anymore," she whispered to the empty room. "I don't belong to anyone anymore." Outside her window, snow began to fall, late spring snow that would melt by morning, leaving only mud and memory. Eleanor pulled the curtain closed and prepared for bed, trying not to think about gray eyes that saw too much, or the way her past followed her like shadow even into this remote sanctuary. Tomorrow she would be Miss McKenna, schoolteacher from Boston, ready to educate the children of Timber Rock. Tonight, she was just a woman alone in a cold room, hoping that the mountains were high enough and the forest deep enough to hide her from what she'd been. As she lay in the narrow bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of this new place, Eleanor touched the spot on her shoulder where fabric hid skin, even through the cotton of her nightgown. She could feel the slight rays of scar tissue there, the mark that proclaimed what she'd been, what she'd escaped. She'd come so far. Surely it was far enough. But in the darkness, with snow falling silent outside and strangers sleeping in rooms around her, Eleanor couldn't quite make herself believe it. The schoolhouse bell rang across Timber Rock at precisely 8 o'clock, its bronze voice carrying through the morning mist. Eleanor stood at the doorway, watching as children emerged from the forest paths and town streets like curious deer. Some came eagerly, others dragged their feet through the mud, and a few had to be practically pushed by older siblings. "Good morning," she said to each one, learning names and faces. The Garrett boys Father Miguel had warned her about arrived last. Tom, 12, with defiant eyes, and Samuel, 10, trying to mirror his brother's swagger. 3 weeks had passed since her arrival, and Eleanor had established a routine that kept her anchored. Rise at dawn, breakfast at Mrs. Pritchard's, then the short walk to the schoolhouse where 22 students awaited her instruction. They ranged from 6 to 16, their education levels as varied as their ages. Miss McKenna, a small voice piped up during the arithmetic lesson. It was Lucy Morrison, 7 years old with ribbons in her hair. "Why don't you never roll up your sleeves like Miss Patterson used to?" Eleanor's chalk stilled on the board. "It isn't proper for a lady to bare her arms in public. Lucy, now, who can solve this problem?" But children were perceptive in ways adults had forgotten to be. They noticed things, how she always wore high collars despite the warming weather, how she changed the subject when they asked about her life before Timber Rock, how she sometimes stared out the window as if watching for something. After dismissing the students for lunch, Eleanor remained in the empty schoolhouse, preparing the afternoon lessons. The door creaked open, bringing with it the scent of leather and tobacco. "Miss McKenna." Josiah Whitman filled the doorframe, his bulk blocking the sunlight. He owned the largest saloon in town and fancied himself a man of importance. "Thought I'd stop by, see how you're settling in." "Quite well, thank you, Mr. Whitman." Eleanor didn't look up from her work. He moved closer, his boots heavy on the plank floor. "Pretty woman like you must get lonely. I could show you around the town, perhaps dinner at the hotel." "That's kind, but I'm quite busy with my duties." His hand landed on her desk. Thick fingers splayed across her lesson plans. "Now, don't be unfriendly. A woman in your position needs friends." Eleanor finally met his eyes, keeping her expression neutral despite the familiar crawl of revulsion. "My position, Mr. Whitman, is that of a respectable schoolteacher." "Good day." His face reddened. "Think you're too good for folks here? We'll see about that." After he left, Eleanor's hands shook as she gathered her papers. She knew that tone, that look. She'd seen it too many times before, in faces of men who thought they could take what they wanted. The afternoon passed slowly. When the last child left, Eleanor walked to the teacher's house behind the school, now habitable thanks to Mr. Reed's work. He'd repaired the roof, fixed the door frame, and replaced broken windows, all while maintaining the same distant demeanor from their first meeting. She was starting a fire in the small stove when she heard the hammering. Following the sound, she found Thatcher Reed repairing the fence around her vegetable garden. "Mr. Reed, I didn't hire you for this." He straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. "Storm last night knocked down a section. Can't have the deer eating your vegetables come summer." "Thank you, but I can't pay." "Didn't ask for payment." He went back to work, each hammer strike precise and powerful. Eleanor watched him, puzzled by this taciturn man who fixed things without being asked and barely spoke 2 words when he did. "Would you like some water? Or coffee?" "Water'd be good." She brought him a cup, noticing how he drank without letting his eyes leave the tree line. "You watch the forest like you expect trouble." "Habit." He handed back the cup. "Man learns to watch in the war, never quite stops." "Which side?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. His gray eyes found hers. Does it matter now? I suppose not. Confederate, he said quietly. 3rd Virginia Infantry. Not a popular thing to be in some places. Eleanor nodded slowly. We all have pasts we'd rather leave buried. Mr. Reed. Something shifted in his expression. A recognition, perhaps, of a kindred spirit carrying hidden wounds. He went back to the fence, and she returned to her house, but the moment lingered between them like morning mist. That evening, a spring storm rolled in from the mountains. Eleanor sat by her window, grading papers by lamplight, when her horse in the small stable began whinnying frantically. She grabbed her shawl and lantern, stepping into the driving rain. The stable door had blown open. Her mare, Buttercup, was rearing in her stall, eyes rolling white with fear. Eleanor tried to calm her, but the horse's panic was infectious. As she reached for the halter, Buttercup lurched sideways, knocking Eleanor into the wall. Pain shot through her shoulder as she fell, her dress tearing on a protruding nail. She struggled to her feet, rain soaking through the ripped fabric, when strong hands suddenly gripped her arms. Easy now? Thatcher Reed materialized from the storm, guiding her out of the stall. You're hurt. The horse. I'll see to her. Get inside. But Eleanor couldn't move. The torn dress had slipped down her shoulder, and in the lamplight, she saw his eyes fix on what was revealed. Not just pale skin, but the edge of intricate black ink, the curve of a dark lily etched forever into her flesh. Time stopped. Rain hammered the stable roof. Their eyes met, and in his gaze she saw not the disgust she feared, but something worse, understanding. Inside, he said again, softer this time. You're bleeding. In her small kitchen. Eleanor sat rigid as Thatcher tended the cut on her shoulder. She'd pulled on a robe, but they both knew what he'd seen. His hands were gentle but efficient, cleaning the wound with whiskey that made her gasp. It's not deep, he said. Won't need stitching. Mr. Reed. Thatcher. He secured a bandage, then stepped back. My name's Thatcher. Eleanor pulled the robe tighter. What you saw? I saw nothing that concerns me, but his eyes said differently. They held questions, worries, a protective instinct she didn't deserve. You know what it means. A mark like that. He was quiet for a long moment. I know what people think it means. I also know that people aren't always what their marks say they are. She laughed bitterly. How philosophical. I've got my own marks. Eleanor. Her first name felt intimate in the lamplight kitchen. Scars that tell stories I'd rather forget doesn't make them the truth of who I am now. These are different. The words came out raw, desperate. These marks, their ownership, property, their... She couldn't finish. Thatcher moved to the stove, stoking the fire against the chill. How old were you? The question was so gentle it nearly broke her. 15. His hand stilled. When he turned back, his face was carved from stone. Children can't choose their scars. I'm not a child anymore. No. He moved toward the door. You're a woman trying to build a new life, same as any of us out here. He paused at the threshold. Your horse is calm now. I fixed the stable door. Thatcher, he turned back. Will you tell anyone? Tell them what? That you got hurt in the storm and I helped bandage your shoulder? Nothing more to tell. After he left, Eleanor sat in her kitchen until dawn, touching the bandage on her shoulder. She'd been seen, truly seen, for the first time in years. And instead of running, Thatcher Reed had tended her wound and kept her secret. She didn't know whether to feel relieved or terrified. The next morning brought clear skies and gossip. Mrs. Pritchard mentioned at breakfast that Mr. Reed had been seen leaving the teacher's house late at night. Eleanor kept her expression neutral, explaining about the horse and the storm. But she could see speculation in the other boarders' eyes. At school, she wore her highest collar despite the warmth. The children sensed her distraction, growing restless as the day wore on. When she finally dismissed them, she found Whitman waiting outside. Heard you had a visitor last night, he said, blocking her path. "That Confederate blacksmith thought you were too respectable for dinner, but not too respectable for him? Mr. Reed helped with my horse during the storm. That's all." Whitman stepped closer, and she smelled whiskey on his breath. "Women like you always think you're better. But I know. Is there a problem here?" Thatcher's voice cut through the afternoon air. He stood at the corner of the schoolhouse, hammer in hand, gray eyes fixed on Whitman. "No problem. Reed, just having a chat with the schoolmarm. Chat's over." Thatcher didn't move, but something in his stance made Whitman step back. "This isn't your business, Confederate. I'm making it my business. Move along." For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then Whitman spat in the dirt and walked away, throwing a last look over his shoulder that promised this wasn't over. Eleanor released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "You didn't need to." "Yes, I did." Thatcher watched Whitman disappear into his saloon. "Men like that don't stop pushing until someone pushes back. I've handled men like that before." "I'm sure you have." His voice held no judgment, only a quiet fury she didn't quite understand. "Doesn't mean you should have to handle them alone." That night, Eleanor lay awake thinking about marks and scars, about the weight of the past and the possibility of futures. Outside her window, she could see the glow from the blacksmith shop where Thatcher worked late, the ring of his hammer a steady rhythm in the darkness. She touched her bandaged shoulder and wondered if some marks could be overcome not by hiding them, but by finding someone who could see past them to the person underneath. But that kind of hope was dangerous for women like her. Almost as dangerous as the growing warmth she felt when Thatcher Reed looked at her with those knowing gray eyes. The stranger rode into Timber Rock on a Tuesday afternoon, when the sawmill whistle had just announced the shift change. Eleanor was teaching the children about the Continental Congress when Lucy Morrison ran to the window. "There's a fancy man coming down Main Street." Indeed, there was. Eleanor glimpsed him through the glass, black coat despite the warm May weather, silver-headed cane across his saddle, the kind of groomed appearance that marked him as coming from somewhere far more civilized than Timber Rock. "Back to your seats," Eleanor said firmly, though unease prickled down her spine. Strangers were rare here. Strangers who looked like they belonged in city drawing rooms rather than mountain towns were rarer still. After school, she lingered in the classroom, reluctant to walk past the hotel where the newcomer would likely stay. But hiding would only draw more attention. She gathered her things and stepped into the afternoon sun. "Miss McKenna, Mrs.—" Pritchard's voice carried across the street. "There's a gentleman asking about you at the hotel. Says he's a school inspector from Sacramento." Eleanor's hands tightened on her books. "I wasn't aware we were due for an inspection." Neither was anyone else. Mayor's in a tizzy about it." At the hotel, Eleanor found Mayor Garrett, Father Miguel, and 2 other school board members gathered in the parlor with the stranger. He rose when she entered, average height, perhaps 40, with pale eyes that reminded her of a snake's. "Ah, you must be Miss McKenna." His smile didn't reach those cold eyes. "William Carver, Department of Education. I'm touring the frontier schools, ensuring standards are met." "Mr. Carver." Eleanor inclined her head, not offering her hand. "I wasn't informed of your visit. I prefer to arrive unannounced. One sees the true state of things that way." He studied her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "You came from Boston, I understand?" "Yes." "Which school?" "The Thornfield Academy, a small institution." She'd practiced this lie until it felt like truth. "Curious. I have colleagues in Boston who've never heard of it." Mayor Garrett intervened. "Miss McKenna came with excellent references. Mr. Carver." The children have made remarkable progress under her instruction. "I'm sure." Carver's gaze never left Eleanor's face. "Still, I'll need to observe your classes. And perhaps we could discuss your background more thoroughly, over dinner. I'm afraid I have papers to grade." "Tomorrow, then. I insist." That night, Eleanor paced her small house like a caged animal. Everything about Carver felt wrong. The way he'd looked at her, the probing questions, the convenient excuse of being a school inspector. She'd seen bounty hunters before. They all had that same predatory patience. A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. She opened the door to find Thatcher, his expression grim. "Walk with me," he said quietly. "Too many years in town." They headed into the forest, following a deer path she'd never noticed before. The canopy blocked the setting sun, creating a green twilight world. When they were far enough from town, Thatcher stopped. "That man's no school inspector." Eleanor's laugh was brittle. "How can you tell?" His hands, for one, soft, but not scholar soft. There's calluses from gun work, and he's been asking about women in town, specifically, women with distinctive marks. The forest suddenly felt too close. "Oh." Thatcher stepped nearer, his presence solid and reassuring. "I've got a friend who used to run with bounty hunters before he found religion." He recognized the type, started asking around. "Carver's been tracking someone up from Louisiana. A woman who—" He paused. "Who escaped from a bad situation." Eleanor turned away, wrapping her arms around herself. "How much is the bounty? Does it matter? I'd like to know what I'm worth." His hand touched her shoulder gently. "You're worth more than any price they could put on your head." She spun to face him, anger flashing. "You don't know what I've done, what I am. I know you're a good teacher. I know you're kind to children and patient with fools. I know you're building something here. Built on lies. Built on hope," he corrected. "Same as all of us out here." The fight drained out of her. "What am I supposed to do? Run again? You could—" His jaw tightened. "Or you could stay and let those of us who care about you help. Us. Father Miguel knows something's wrong. So does Doc Morrison, Lucy's father, even Mrs. Pritchard, though she'd never admit it. You've got people here. Eleanor, you're not alone anymore." The words broke something inside her. She'd been alone so long. She'd forgotten what it felt like to be part of something. He'll destroy it all. "Tell everyone what I am." "The mark. Can I see it?" The request should have offended her. Instead, she found herself turning, unbuttoning the top of her high collar with trembling fingers. She pulled the fabric aside, revealing the full design, a black lily with thorned vines that curved across her shoulder and down toward her shoulder blade. Beautiful and terrible. The mark of a particular establishment in New Orleans that branded its women like cattle. Thatcher's fingers ghosted over the ink, never quite touching. "My grandmother grew lilies," he said quietly. "Said they meant rebirth, rising from the mud to bloom clean." Eleanor's voice caught. "That's not what this one means. Meanings can change." His hand settled warm and steady on her unmarked shoulder. "You're not what they tried to make you." She turned in his arms, looking up at his weathered face. "Why do you care? You barely know me." "I know enough." His thumb brushed her cheek. "I know I've been dead inside since my wife passed. Until you came to town and reminded me what it felt like to want to protect something precious." The kiss was inevitable as sunrise, soft at first, then deeper as years of loneliness and fear melted away. Eleanor clung to him, tasting possibility on his lips, feeling safe for the first time since she was 15 years old. When they broke apart, the forest had grown dark around them. Thatcher kept her close, his forehead resting against hers. "I won't let him take you. You can't fight the law. Watch me." He pulled back to look at her. "But first, we need information. You still have that dinner with him tomorrow?" Eleanor nodded reluctantly. "Good. Find out what he really knows, how he tracked you here. I'll do some tracking of my own." They walked back through the darkness, hands linked like teenagers. At her door, Thatcher kissed her once more, a promise and a claim. "Lock your doors tonight. I'll be watching." Eleanor slept fitfully, starting at every sound. In the morning, she dressed carefully, her most modest dress, her highest collar. If Carver was hunting, she wouldn't make it easy. School passed in a blur. The children sensed her distraction, growing restless. When Carver appeared in the doorway during arithmetic, they fell silent. "Don't mind me," he said smoothly. "Continue your lesson." But his presence poisoned the air. Eleanor stumbled over words, dropped her chalk, felt his eyes boring into her back. When she finally dismissed the children for lunch, he approached. "Nervous, Miss McKenna? You're disrupting my classroom. My apologies. Shall we say 6 o'clock for dinner? The hotel dining room should suffice." She had no choice but to agree. That evening, Eleanor sat across from Carver at a small table, barely touching her food while he ate with precise, predatory movements. "Tell me," he said casually, "what made you leave Boston for this wilderness? Adventure, a desire to make a difference, noble goals." He sipped his wine. "Though one wonders what a refined woman like yourself is running from." "I'm not running from anything." "No?" He reached into his coat, producing a folded paper. "Then perhaps you can explain this." Eleanor's heart stopped. It was a sketch, rough but recognizable, of her face above the words. "Wanted for theft and murder. Violet Beauchamp, escaped from New Orleans. Identifying mark, black lily tattoo on left shoulder, dangerous. An unfortunate resemblance," she managed. "Indeed, though I wonder—" He leaned forward. "If I were to ask you to show me your left shoulder, what would I find? You would find yourself thrown out of this establishment for making improper requests of a lady." His smile was sharp as glass. "Ladies don't usually murder their benefactors, Miss McKenna. Or should I say, Miss Beauchamp." Eleanor stood. "This conversation is over." "Sit down." His voice cracked like a whip. "Unless you want me to share this poster with the good people of Timber Rock tonight?" She sank back into the chair, mind racing. "Better. Now, here's what's going to happen. You'll come with me quietly in the morning. No fuss, no goodbyes. The bounty specifies alive, but it doesn't specify undamaged. The man I allegedly killed, he was attacking me. A prominent citizen versus a marked woman? No court would side with you." He folded the poster. "Morning, Miss McKenna. Be ready." Eleanor walked home in a daze, but when she reached her door, she found Thatcher waiting in the shadows. "How bad?" She told him everything. When she finished, his face was stone. "Pack light," he said. "We're leaving tonight." "We? You think I'd let you run alone?" He cupped her face. "I told you, you've got people here. Now let's go before that snake realizes you're gone." But as they turned toward the stable, a figure stepped from behind the schoolhouse. Carver, gun drawn. "Going somewhere?" Thatcher moved in front of Eleanor. "Let her be. Step aside. Blacksmith, this doesn't concern you." "Like hell it doesn't." The gun shifted. "Then you can die with her." The shot was impossibly loud in the quiet night. But it wasn't Carver's gun that fired. He crumpled forward, revealing Father Miguel standing behind him with an ancient pistol. "Forgive me, Lord," the priest murmured. Then, to them, "He's not dead, just stunned. But he won't stay down long. You need to go. Father, I've already sent word to the sheriff in Sacramento about a false inspector threatening our teacher. It'll buy you time, but not much." He pressed a bag into Eleanor's hands. "Food and money from the collection plate. God go with you." As Thatcher saddled their horses, Eleanor looked back at the town that had become home. Lights were coming on as people investigated the gunshot. "Ready?" Thatcher asked. She mounted Buttercup, then reached for his hand. "Together? Always?" They rode into the forest as voices rose behind them, disappearing into the darkness between the trees. Whatever came next, Eleanor knew she wouldn't face it alone. The mark on her shoulder might proclaim what she'd been, but the man beside her saw who she could become, and that, perhaps, was its own kind of rebirth. They rode through the night, following game trails Thatcher knew from years of hunting. The forest was alive with nocturnal sounds, owls calling, small creatures rustling through underbrush, the creek babbling over stones. Eleanor had never been this deep in the wilderness, but she trusted the man leading her through the darkness. When dawn broke, they were high in the mountains, the town of Timber Rock invisible behind ridges and valleys. Thatcher finally slowed their pace, guiding them to a small clearing beside a stream. "We'll rest the horses," he said, dismounting with the easy grace of a man born to the saddle. Eleanor slid down, her legs trembling from hours of riding. The morning air was cold and thin, making her breath visible. She watched Thatcher tend to the horses, his movements efficient and careful. "You asked me once about the war," he said without turning, "why I watched the forest." "You don't have to." "I want to." He faced her then, gray eyes holding memories. "After Appomattox, I couldn't go home, nothing there but burned fields and graves. So I drifted west, did things I'm not proud of, learned to survive, learned to read danger in the way birds go quiet or how the wind shifts." Eleanor moved closer. "Is that how you ended up in Timber Rock?" "Met a woman in Denver, Sarah. She had consumption, needed mountain air. We settled in Timber Rock, built a life. She died 2 winters ago." He touched the wedding band he still wore. "Thought I died with her, until a schoolteacher from Boston arrived with secrets in her eyes and made me remember what it felt like to care whether I lived or died." Eleanor reached for his hand. "Thatcher, let me finish." He squeezed her fingers. "I need you to understand. Whatever you've done, wherever that mark came from, it doesn't matter to me, but I won't let anyone hurt you, not while I'm breathing." The words broke the dam she'd built around her past. Standing in that mountain clearing, with the sun painting the peaks gold and this good man holding her hand, Eleanor finally told her story. "I was 15 when my father died. Debt collectors took everything, the house, the furniture, even Mother's jewelry. There was an uncle in New Orleans who promised to help, said he'd find me work in his textile business." She laughed bitterly. "There was no textile business." Thatcher's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. "The place he sold me to was exclusive. Only wealthy men, politicians, judges. They marked all the girls so we couldn't run, said the tattoo was our contract, that any lawman who saw it would know we were property." "Eleanor, I survived 5 years." Her voice was steady now, as if she were telling someone else's story. "Learned to smile, to be whatever they wanted. But one night, a man wanted more than I could give. He was drunk, violent. When he started choking me, I grabbed the letter opener from the desk." She stopped, waiting for Thatcher to pull away. Instead, he drew her closer. "He died quickly. I took what money I could find and ran. Been running ever since. St. Louis, Denver, Sacramento. Always moving before anyone could look too close." "The man you killed," Thatcher said quietly. "What was his name?" "Judge Cornelius Whitmore. Why?" A grim smile touched his lips. "Because I spent a month in his jail in '63 when the Union took New Orleans. He was corrupt as they come, took bribes, sold pardons, destroyed anyone who opposed him." He tilted her chin up. "You didn't murder a man, Eleanor. You put down a rabid dog." The relief that flooded through her was overwhelming. She collapsed against his chest, finally allowing tears she'd held back for years. Thatcher held her as she cried, murmuring comfort into her hair. When the storm passed, he produced a handkerchief. "Better?" "Yes." She wiped her eyes. "But it doesn't change the bounty, or the fact that Carver will follow us." "Then we'll keep moving. California's big, Oregon's bigger. We can find somewhere new. I'm tired of running." "I know." He studied her face. "What do you want to do?" Eleanor looked around the clearing, at the mountains touching sky, the clear stream, the wild flowers growing despite the altitude. "I want to fight back. I want to stop being afraid." Something fierce kindled in Thatcher's eyes. "Then we fight, but first we need to be smart. Carver's not the only bounty hunter. If he found you, others can too." They spent the morning planning. Thatcher knew of an old mining camp deeper in the mountains. Abandoned, but with shelter. They'd lay low there while figuring out their next move. The camp was a day's ride through increasingly rough terrain. What they found was a collection of log cabins in various states of decay. But one was solid enough, with a roof that only leaked in one corner and a stone fireplace that still drew properly. "Home, sweet home," Thatcher said dryly. They spent the afternoon making it livable, clearing debris, gathering firewood, setting up their meager supplies. As night fell, they sat by the fire eating beans and hardtack, the intimacy both natural and charged with possibility. "I've never done this before," Eleanor admitted. "Been with someone by choice. I mean," Thatcher's hand found hers. "We don't have to." "I want to." She turned to face him fully. "For the first time in my life, I want to be with someone because I choose it. Because I choose you." He kissed her then, gentle and searching. Eleanor melted into it, marveling at how different it felt when touch was freely given rather than demanded. They made love on a bed of pine boughs and blankets, the fire painting their skin gold. Every caress was a promise, every whispered word a claim on a future they might not have. Afterward, they lay entwined, Eleanor tracing the scars on Thatcher's chest, each one a story of survival. "What happens when we can't hide anymore?" she asked. "Then we face whatever comes, together." For 3 days, they lived in a bubble outside time. Thatcher taught her to shoot his revolver, patient with her fumbling until she could hit a pine cone at 20 paces. Eleanor shared more of her past, not just the darkness, but glimpses of the girl she'd been before, who'd loved books and dreamed of teaching. On the 4th morning, Thatcher went hunting while Eleanor washed clothes in the stream. She was actually humming, when she heard horses approaching. 3 riders emerged from the trees. Not Carver, but men cut from the same cloth. The leader, a scarred man with dead eyes, smiled. "Violet Beauchamp, been looking for you." Eleanor's hand inched toward the revolver at her hip. "You're mistaken." "Don't think so. Carver sent word before that priest knocked him cold. Said he'd found you, but needed backup." The man dismounted. "Come quiet-like, and we won't hurt your man when he gets back." "You think I trust bounty hunters? You think you got a choice?" Eleanor drew the gun, proud when her hand didn't shake. "There's always a choice." The men laughed. "Little girl playing with guns. Put it down before—" The shot echoed off the mountains. The leader looked down at the spreading red on his shirt, surprise replacing arrogance. Eleanor had aimed for his shoulder but hit center mass. "Bitch shot me," he gasped, falling. The other 2 went for their weapons. Eleanor fired again, missing, then dove behind a boulder as bullets splintered wood where she'd been standing. More gunfire, but from a different direction. Thatcher had returned, rifle in hand, laying down covering fire from the tree line. 1 bounty hunter fell immediately. The other tried to run but didn't make it far. When the silence settled, thick with gun smoke, Eleanor emerged from cover. 3 men lay dead or dying. Her hand started shaking. "You did good," Thatcher said, pulling her against him. "You did what you had to. I killed someone. Again. You defended yourself. There's no shame in that." But Eleanor knew the truth. It would never end. As long as that bounty existed, men would come, unless— "Thatcher, what if we went back to New Orleans?" He pulled back to study her face. "You want to go back?" "I want to end this. The bounty was posted by the establishment I escaped from. If I could prove what they really are, what they do to girls like I was, maybe I could get the bounty withdrawn." That's dangerous thinking. So is spending our lives looking over our shoulders. Thatcher was quiet for a long moment, considering. "I still have contacts in Louisiana, Confederate veterans who don't much like carpetbagger judges and corrupt officials. Maybe it's time Judge Whitmore's crimes came to light, along with everyone who protected him. Hope bloomed in Eleanor's chest for the first time in years. "You'd do that? Go back into Union territory for me?" "Eleanor," he cupped her face, "I'd walk through hell itself for you." They buried the bodies in a ravine. Thatcher said the mountains would reclaim them soon enough. Then they packed what they could carry and prepared for the journey that would take them back to Eleanor's nightmares. But she wasn't the same frightened girl who'd fled New Orleans 5 years ago. She could shoot now. She had a man who'd kill to protect her. Most importantly, she'd tasted freedom and would die before giving it up. The ride down from the mountains felt like descending into battle. At the first town, Thatcher sent telegrams to old army contacts. Eleanor cut her hair shorter, dressed in men's clothing for travel. They became Mr. and Mrs. Reed, homesteaders heading east. On the train to Sacramento, Eleanor fingered the wedding band Thatcher had bought, simple iron fashioned by his own hands. "What if they don't believe us? Then we'll make them believe." He covered her hand with his. "The war taught me something. Sometimes you can't run from a fight. Sometimes you have to turn and face what's hunting you." Eleanor leaned against his shoulder, drawing strength from his solid presence. The mark on her shoulder seemed to burn beneath her shirt, but for the first time, she welcomed the sensation. She wasn't Violet Beauchamp anymore, the marked girl who'd killed to survive. She was Eleanor McKenna, teacher, survivor, and soon-to-be fighter for justice. The lily might remain on her skin forever, but she'd decide what it meant. The train journey back to New Orleans took 5 days, each mile carrying Eleanor closer to her nightmares. She and Thatcher traveled as husband and wife, keeping to their compartment, speaking little. At night, she'd wake gasping from dreams of lily-scented rooms and grasping hands, only to find Thatcher's arms around her, anchoring her to the present in St. Louis. They met Thatcher's contact, Marcus Webb, a former Confederate captain turned private investigator. He was a lean man with sharp eyes and a folder full of information. Judge Whitmore had enemies. Webb explained in their hotel room. His death was convenient for several people, but the establishment, Madame Celeste's, had enough influence to ensure the investigation focused on finding the girl who killed him rather than asking why. Eleanor forced herself to remain steady. "What about the other girls?" "Some are still there. Others have disappeared over the years. The place operates under legal protection. Police, judges, city officials all take their cut." Webb pulled out a document. "But there's been a reform movement growing. Northern journalists looking for corruption stories. If we could get evidence." "What kind of evidence?" "Records, names of protectors, proof of girls being held against their will." Webb met Eleanor's eyes. "Someone who could testify about what really happens there." Eleanor's throat tightened. "They'll kill me before letting me speak." "Not if we're smart about it." Thatcher interjected. "We need allies, legal representation, public pressure." They spent 2 days planning. Webb had connections, a crusading newspaper editor, a federal prosecutor investigating corruption, even a minister who ran an underground railroad for girls escaping the trade. But they needed proof, and that meant Eleanor would have to return to Madame Celeste's. "Absolutely not," Thatcher said when the plan was proposed. "It's the only way," Eleanor argued. "They keep records in the office, client lists, payment records, everything. If we could get those, then let me go. Or Webb. You don't know the layout. I do." She touched his face. "I spent 5 years memorizing every exit, every hiding spot. I can get in and out." The argument continued until Eleanor played her final card. "You said I needed to stop running. This is how I stop." New Orleans hadn't changed, still humid, still beautiful, still rotting beneath its elegant surface. Eleanor pulled her hat low as their carriage rolled through familiar streets. The scent of magnolias made her stomach turn. They took rooms in a boarding house in the American Quarter, far from the French Quarter where Madame Celeste stood. That first night, while Thatcher met with Webb's contacts, Eleanor stood at the window watching the gaslit streets below. A knock came at the door. She tensed, hand going to the derringer in her pocket. But it was a woman, middle-aged, plainly dressed, with kind eyes. Mrs. Reed. I'm Martha Dubois. Marcus Webb sent me. Eleanor let her in cautiously. You're with the reformers? I run a house for girls who've left the trade, some legally, some otherwise. Martha studied her. You're her, aren't you? Violet. Eleanor's chest tightened. That's not my name anymore. Good. That girl needed to die so you could live. Martha sat down, businesslike. I've got 2 girls willing to testify about their experiences, but they're scared. If you could talk to them, why would they trust me? Martha smiled sadly. Because you got out. You killed a man who hurt you and survived. To them, you're hope. The meeting was arranged for the following night, in a small church basement. Eleanor faced 2 young women, Sophie, barely 18, and Claire, perhaps 20. Both had the hollow eyes she remembered from her own mirror. They said you were dead. Sophie whispered. Said they caught you and made an example. They lied. Eleanor replied. They lie about everything. For an hour. She listened to their stories, so similar to her own. The false promises, the debt that never decreased, the marks that branded them as property. When Claire rolled up her sleeve to show her own lily tattoo, Eleanor finally did what she'd never done before. She showed hers. It's not a mark of shame, she said quietly. It's proof of what we survived, and now it's going to help us destroy them. The girls agreed to testify if they could be protected. Martha promised safe houses, new identities if needed. They were building a case, but they still needed the records from Madame Celeste's. 3 nights later, during a thunderstorm that would mask sound and movement, Eleanor stood in an alley behind the establishment she'd once fled. Thatcher was with her, along with Webb and another man. You sure about the guard patterns? Webb asked. Eleanor nodded. Tuesday nights are slow. Only 1 man at the back entrance, and he drinks. I'm going with you, Thatcher said for the 100th time. You'll stand out. I won't. She was dressed as a laundress, the kind of invisible woman who came and went at all hours. 20 minutes. If I'm not out by then, I'm coming in. Thatcher finished. Eleanor kissed him quick and hard. 20 minutes. The back door was unlocked. Laundresses were expected. Eleanor kept her head down, carrying her basket of linens through familiar halls. The smell hit her like a physical blow, perfume and cigar smoke and something else. Something that spoke of captivity. She heard laughter from the front parlors where clients were entertained. Her feet found their way to the narrow stairs that led to Madame Celeste's office. The woman would be holding court downstairs at this hour, calculating the night's profits later. The office door was locked, but Eleanor had learned to pick locks years ago, a skill taught by another girl who dreamed of escape. Inside, gaslight revealed an opulent room with a massive desk. The records were where they'd always been, a hidden drawer behind the main ones. Eleanor pulled out ledgers, correspondence, photographs. Her hands shook as she recognized names, city officials, police captains, judges, all carefully documented with payments, services rendered, preferences noted. She was stuffing papers into her basket when footsteps sounded in the hall. Eleanor froze, then dove behind a curtain as the door opened. Madame Celeste entered, older now, hair more silver than black, but still regal in her crimson gown. She moved to the desk, humming softly. Eleanor held her breath, derringer in hand. If Celeste opened the drawer, she'd know someone had been there. The woman's fingers traced the desktop, then stilled. I know you're here, Celeste said conversationally. I can smell the fear. It's quite distinctive. Eleanor stayed frozen. Violet, isn't it? Yes, I thought so. Did you really think you could come back here without me knowing? Celeste turned slowly, scanning the room. The laundress at the back door. One of my girls recognized you despite the disguise. You always did have distinctive eyes. Eleanor stepped out, gun raised. Don't move, Celeste laughed. Oh, my dear, still so dramatic. Do you plan to shoot me too? If I have to. That would be a mistake. You see, I've been expecting you. When that bounty hunter sent word he'd found you, I knew you'd eventually come back. You always were too smart to keep running forever. I'm taking the records." "Are you?" Celeste moved closer, seemingly unbothered by the gun. "And what then? You think a few documents will bring down an institution that survived for 30 years? It's a start. It's naive." Celeste's voice hardened. "You were property. Violet, bought and paid for. The mark on your shoulder proves it. No court will take your word over mine. We'll see about that. Yes, we will, because I'm going to let you take those records." Eleanor blinked, surprised. Celeste smiled. "Oh yes, take them to your reformers. See how far you get, because for every judge you can prove bought our services. 3 more owe me favors. For every girl willing to testify. I have 10 who'll swear they chose this life freely." "You're lying." "Am I? Tell me. What happened to Annie? The redhead who taught you to pick locks?" Eleanor's blood chilled. Annie had tried to escape 6 months before Eleanor succeeded. "Found in the river," Celeste continued. "Tragic accident, just like Marie who went to the police, and Justine who tried to tell a reporter, so many accidents in New Orleans. You can't kill us all. I don't have to. Just enough to discourage the rest." Celeste was close enough now that Eleanor could see the calculation in her eyes. "But I'll make you a deal. Leave. Tonight. Never come back. Never speak of this place. And I'll withdraw the bounty. You can have your little life with your blacksmith. And the other girls are not your concern." Eleanor's finger tightened on the trigger. One shot, and the woman who'd stolen her youth would be dead. But that wouldn't free the others. It would only make her a murderer twice over. "You're thinking too long," Celeste noted. "Your 20 minutes are nearly up. Your man will come charging in. There'll be violence. People will die. Is that what you want?" A door slammed somewhere below. Shouts erupted. Not violence, but panic. Eleanor heard the word fire and smelled smoke. Celeste's composure cracked. "What have you done?" "Not me," Eleanor said, backing toward the door with her basket of evidence. "But I'd run if I were you. Fire spreads fast in old buildings." She fled down the stairs as smoke began filling the halls. Girls in various states of undress were running for exits. Eleanor joined the chaos, pushing through to the back door where Thatcher waited. "Right on time," he said, taking her arm. The fire? Webb's friends. A distraction that got out of hand. They ran through the alley as bells began clanging across the city. "Did you get them?" Eleanor clutched the basket. "Everything." Behind them, flames licked at the windows of Madame Celeste's. By morning, the establishment would be ash and memory. Some would call it justice. Eleanor just called it a start. They didn't stay to watch it burn. There was too much work to do, testimonies to record, evidence to present, a case to build. But as their carriage rolled through the humid night, Eleanor felt something lift from her shoulders. The lily was still there, would always be there, but its power over her was finally, truly broken. The fire at Madame Celeste's made headlines across New Orleans. "Mysterious blaze destroys notorious establishment," the papers proclaimed, though they danced around what kind of establishment it had been. 3 girls had died in the flames, trapped in locked rooms, the report said. Eleanor couldn't eat for 2 days after hearing that. "It wasn't your fault," Thatcher told her in their boarding house room. "Those locks were there before you arrived." But guilt gnawed at her. They'd meant to create a distraction, not a tragedy. Webb's reformer friends swore the fire had been small, controlled. Something, or someone, had made it spread. The evidence Eleanor had rescued proved invaluable. Federal prosecutor James Hartwell, a stern man from Ohio with no ties to New Orleans society, took one look at the ledgers and immediately convened a grand jury. But word traveled fast in the French Quarter. By the second day, Eleanor couldn't leave the boarding house without feeling watched. Madame Celeste survived. Webb reported during one of his visits. "She's staying with Judge Rousseau, rallying her supporters. The story being spread is that reformers burned down a legitimate boarding house for young ladies." "Young ladies who were locked in at night," Eleanor said bitterly. We know that, but proving it in court is another matter. Webb pulled out a telegram. This came for you, Mrs. Reed, from California. Eleanor read it twice before the words sank in. Father Miguel wrote that William Carver had been arrested for impersonating a federal official. More importantly, the town of Timber Rock was petitioning for her return. The children needed their teacher. "They want me back?" she whispered. Thatcher read over her shoulder. Sounds like Father Miguel did some preaching about forgiveness and second chances. For a moment, Eleanor let herself imagine it, returning to her little schoolhouse, teaching the Garrett boys arithmetic, tending her garden. But then she thought of Sophie and Claire and all the girls still trapped. "I can't leave. Not yet." The grand jury hearings began the following week. Eleanor testified behind a screen to protect her identity, but she could feel the hostility from some jury members, men whose names appeared in Celeste's ledgers. She told her story simply, without embellishment, the promises of honest work, the drugs in the wine that first night, waking up with the lily already etched into her skin, the years that followed, each day carefully documented in Celeste's own hand. "These records show you were purchased for $500, Prosecutor Hartwell said. "Can you explain what that means?" "It was called a debt, for room, board, clothes, the tattoo. But no matter how much money we earned, the debt never decreased. There was always some new expense, doctor's visits, protection fees, damages if a client complained. And if you tried to leave," Eleanor's voice stayed steady through practice, "girls who ran were brought back and punished, made examples of. Annie Fitzgerald tried to escape in February of 1880. They found her in the river a week later." "Objection!" One of Celeste's lawyers jumped up. "Hearsay and speculation." Judge Morton, who'd been specially appointed from Baton Rouge, overruled him. The federal government was taking this seriously. Sophie testified next, then Claire. 3 more girls found courage to come forward. Each told the same story with different details: the false promises, the debts, the marks that branded them, the men who paid to do whatever they wished. But Celeste had her own witnesses. Former girls who'd married clients swore they'd chosen their profession freely. City officials testified to the establishment's legitimate business licenses. A doctor claimed the tattoos were decorative choices, not brands. The tide was turning against them when unexpected help arrived. Martha Dubois burst into the prosecutor's office with a young woman in tow, pale, shaking, with bandages on her wrists. "This is Lily Moreau," Martha announced. "Celeste's own niece. She has something to say." Lily's story broke the case open. Raised by her aunt after her parents died, she'd discovered the truth about the family business at 16, when she'd threatened to go to the authorities. Celeste had her forcibly tattooed and put to work like any other girl. She said family meant nothing if it threatened the business. Lily whispered to the grand jury. "She kept me in the tower room, the one that locked from the outside. I was there the night of the fire. If a client hadn't broken down the door." Eleanor held the girl as she cried, remembering her own tears at that age. But Lily had something Eleanor hadn't: proof. Letters in Celeste's own hand discussing the purchase of girls, bribes to officials, even a confession about Annie Fitzgerald. The silly girl thought she could swim to freedom. The river taught her otherwise. The grand jury returned 37 indictments. Celeste was arrested at Judge Rousseau's mansion, still wearing her crimson gown. Half the police force was implicated. 2 city councilmen fled to Mexico. But victory came with a price. 3 nights after the indictments, Eleanor woke to Thatcher shaking her. "Get dressed, now!" The boarding house was surrounded. Not police, Celeste still had friends, but hired thugs. Webb had stationed men of his own, and a firefight erupted in the street. Eleanor and Thatcher escaped through a coal chute, emerging filthy but alive in the next street. "The train station," Thatcher said. "We're leaving tonight." But Eleanor pulled back. "The trial won't happen if you're dead. Hartwell has your testimony. The other girls are in protective custody. You've done enough." At the station, they found chaos. Word of the violence had spread. Reformers and Celeste's supporters faced off on the platforms. In the confusion, a familiar figure emerged from the shadows. Madame Celeste looked older without her finery, dressed in traveling clothes, her silver hair hidden under a hat. She saw Eleanor and smiled coldly. "Running again? Violet?" Eleanor stepped forward, but Thatcher held her back. "Let her go." "Listen to your man," Celeste said. "We're both leaving tonight. The difference is, I'll return when this foolishness dies down. You'll always be running from what you are." "I know what I am," Eleanor said quietly. "I'm the woman who survived you." Celeste's smile faltered. Behind her, police whistles sounded. Someone had recognized her despite the disguise. Madame Celeste, Sergeant O'Brien, one of the few honest cops left, pushed through the crowd. "You're under arrest!" Celeste tried to run but found her way blocked by Sophie and Claire, Martha Dubois, and a dozen other women, former girls, reformers, mothers who'd lost daughters. They didn't touch her, just stood silent witness as O'Brien clasped the shackles on her wrists. "This isn't over," Celeste snarled at Eleanor. "Yes," Eleanor replied. "It is." They took different trains that night. Celeste went north to a federal prison to await trial. Eleanor and Thatcher went west, back toward mountains and freedom. As Louisiana faded behind them, Eleanor finally allowed herself to cry for the girls who hadn't made it out, for the years stolen, for the marks that would never fade. "Where do we go now?" she asked as dawn broke over Texas plains. Thatcher pulled out Father Miguel's telegram. "How about home?" Home. Timber Rock had never been that before, but maybe, with the past finally faced and defeated. It could be 3 weeks later, as their stage rolled into the familiar valley. Eleanor saw the entire town gathered on Main Street. Her stomach clenched with old fear. Mobs meant danger in her experience. But then Lucy Morrison broke from the crowd, running with ribbons streaming. Miss McKenna, you came back!" The Garrett boys followed. Then other students. Soon Eleanor was surrounded by children, all talking at once about how terrible the substitute teacher had been and how nothing was right without her. Over their heads, she saw the adults, Mrs. Pritchard dabbing her eyes, Doc Morrison nodding approval, shopkeepers and mill workers and farmers. Even those who'd shunned her before offered tentative smiles. Father Miguel pushed through, beaming, "Welcome home, both of you. We've been praying for your safe return." "Father," Eleanor began, but he waved her quiet. "The past is past. We're concerned with futures here." He winked. "Speaking of which, when should I schedule the wedding? Thatcher's already built you a proper house. Seems foolish to maintain 2 residences." Eleanor looked at Thatcher, who was trying not to grin. "You built a house? Well, expanded yours. Added a forge out back so I can work from home, and a room for future considerations." Future considerations. He leaned close. "Children. Eleanor. Our children." The word broke something loose in her chest, the last chain binding her to who she'd been. She kissed him there on Main Street, not caring who saw. That night, there was a celebration at the church. Eleanor sat with Thatcher as the town welcomed them properly. Whitman was gone, run out of town for spreading lies. Mrs. Pritchard reported with satisfaction. The school board had voted unanimously to reinstate Eleanor with back pay. As the evening wound down, Eleanor stepped outside for air. The stars were brilliant above the mountains, the air clean and pine-scented. She touched her shoulder absently, feeling the slight rise of scars through fabric. "It still bothers you?" Thatcher joined her, solid and warm. "Not bothers, just reminds." She turned in his arms. "Do you think we'll ever fully escape it? Maybe we're not meant to escape it. Maybe we're meant to transform it." He kissed her forehead. "That mark tried to define you as property. Instead, it became proof of your strength. Celeste is in prison. Other girls are free because of you. That lily doesn't mean what she wanted it to mean anymore." Eleanor considered this, then smiled. When you put it that way, it's almost like a battle scar. Exactly like that, and I've never met a soldier who was ashamed of honest scars. They stood together watching the stars, planning a future that once seemed impossible. In a week, they'd marry properly. By fall, Eleanor might be teaching with a child of her own growing beneath her heart. The lily would always mark her shoulder, but it no longer marked her soul. She'd been Violet Beauchamp, scared and trapped. She'd become Eleanor McKenna, teacher and survivor. Soon she'd be Eleanor Reed, wife and mother and defender of those who needed defending. The mark remained, but the woman had transformed, and that, she realized, was the greatest victory of all. September brought golden light to Timber Rock, painting the aspens in shades of flame. Eleanor stood before her students, one hand resting on the gentle swell beneath her apron. 6 months married, 4 months with child, and she'd never felt more complete. Now, who can tell me what happens when we mix an acid with a base? She asked, holding up 2 glass vials. Tom Garrett's hand shot up. The same boy who'd once been too sullen to participate, now eager to learn. They neutralize each other. Mrs. Reed. Excellent. Just as in chemistry, sometimes opposite forces can create balance. She mixed the solutions, demonstrating the reaction. In life, too, we often find that what seems destructive can lead to transformation. After dismissing the children, Eleanor remained to tidy the classroom. Through the window, she could see Thatcher's forge, smoke rising from the chimney. He'd been working on something special all week, refusing to tell her what. Mrs. Reed. A small voice interrupted her thoughts. Lucy Morrison stood in the doorway, fidgeting with her ribbons. Yes, Lucy? My mama said you used to live somewhere else. Somewhere bad. Is that true? Eleanor set down her books carefully. Children had a way of asking the questions adults danced around. Yes, I did, but that was before I came here. Were you scared? Very scared. Lucy approached slowly. But you're not scared anymore? No, sweetheart, not anymore. Eleanor knelt to the girl's level. Sometimes we have to leave dark places to find the light. That's what I did. I'm glad you found us, Lucy said simply, then hugged Eleanor before running off. Eleanor touched her belly, thinking of the child growing there. What would she tell her own son or daughter about the past? The truth, she decided, but clothed in wisdom rather than bitterness. That evening, a letter arrived that shattered her peace. Eleanor recognized the handwriting before opening it, her hands trembling. Martha Dubois wrote with news from New Orleans. Dearest Eleanor, I hope this finds you well and safe. I write with mixed tidings. The trials have concluded, 17 convictions, including 3 judges and 5 police officials. Celeste herself received 20 years, though she swears appeals will free her. But I must warn you, not everyone was caught. Some of Celeste's associates fled before arrest. Word is they blame you for their downfall. One man in particular, Vincent Crane, has been asking about women with lily tattoos in western towns. He was one of Celeste's enforcers, cruel even by their standards. Please be watchful. You've built a new life, but some ghosts refuse to rest. Your friend in the struggle. Martha Eleanor read the letter twice before showing Thatcher. His face darkened with each word. We should leave, he said immediately. Head further west, maybe Oregon. No. Eleanor's voice was firm. I'm tired of running. This is our home. Our child will be born here. Eleanor, if this Vincent Crane comes, we'll face him, together. She touched her husband's face. You taught me to shoot. This town accepted me back. I won't abandon either lesson. Thatcher pulled her close, his hand protective over her belly. Then we prepare. I'll talk to the sheriff, organize some men. Quietly, Eleanor insisted. I won't have the whole town in panic over what might be nothing. But it wasn't nothing. 2 weeks later, Stranger appeared at Whitman's old saloon, now run by a decent family man named Patterson. The stranger was well-dressed, soft-spoken, asking casual questions about newcomers to town. Had anyone new arrived in the last year? Any women from back east? Word reached Eleanor through Mrs. Pritchard, who'd developed a protective streak. "He's got the look of trouble," the landlady huffed. "Snake eyes and a smile that don't reach them." Eleanor continued teaching, refusing to show fear. But she kept the derringer in her pocket and noticed how Thatcher barely left the forge during school hours, always watching. The confrontation came on a Thursday afternoon. Eleanor was walking home when Vincent Crane stepped from behind the mercantile. He was exactly as she'd imagined, handsome in a cold way, with dead eyes that had seen too much cruelty and liked it. "Miss Violet," he said pleasantly, "you've led me quite a chase." Eleanor's hand found her gun. "That's not my name." "No? The mark on your shoulder says otherwise." He moved closer, casual but predatory. "Madame Celeste sends her regards from prison. She's most upset about the loss of her business. Then she can take it up with the federal prosecutors who convicted her." Crane laughed. "Oh, she is, appeals and such. But in the meantime, she wants compensation. You cost her everything. Seems only fair you pay something back. I owe her nothing." The mark says different. Your property, bought and paid for. The law might have forgotten that, but we haven't." His eyes dropped to her obvious pregnancy. "Though damaged goods now. I see. Still, Madam has buyers who don't mind." The shot came from behind Eleanor. Not her gun. Thatcher's rifle. The bullet taking Crane in the shoulder and spinning him to the ground. The blacksmith emerged from the alley. "Weapon steady." "The lady said she owes nothing. I believe that settles it." Crane clutched his bleeding shoulder, face twisted with pain and rage. "You'll hang for this. Confederate!" "Don't think so." Sheriff Watson appeared with 2 deputies. "See, we've been watching you since you arrived. Mr. Crane, that wanted poster from Louisiana says you're sought for murder, extortion, and trafficking in persons." He nodded to Eleanor. "Mrs. Reed here is a respected member of our community. You're just a criminal who drew on a pregnant woman." "I didn't draw." "That's not how we saw it," Deputy Mills said flatly. The other deputy nodded agreement. As they dragged Crane away, he snarled at Eleanor. "This isn't over. There are others. You'll never be safe." Eleanor stepped forward, back straight despite her trembling. "Tell them Violet Beauchamp is dead. Tell them Eleanor Reed is protected. Tell them this town shoots men who threaten school teachers and mothers." She touched her belly deliberately. "Tell them the lily means nothing here but a flower in my garden." They took Crane to the jail to await transport back to Louisiana. That night, the town held an impromptu meeting at the church. Eleanor tried to stay home, but Thatcher insisted she come. "They need to hear from you," he said. The church was packed. Eleanor saw faces she knew, students, parents, shopkeepers, mill workers. Father Miguel gestured her to the front. "I think," she began, voice shaking slightly, "that you all deserve the truth." And she told them. Not every detail, but enough. The trap of debt and desperation. The mark forced upon her. The escape and years of running. The fight to bring justice back in New Orleans. When she finished, the church was silent. Then Tom Garrett's father stood. "Mrs. Reed taught my boys when no one else would. I don't care where she came from." He sat back down to murmurs of agreement. Doc Morrison rose next. "The past is past. We judge people by their actions here and now." One by one, they stood, not all, but enough. By the end, Eleanor was crying, overwhelmed by acceptance she'd never dared hope for. "Mrs. Pritchard had the last word. Anyone else comes here hunting our school teacher, they'll answer to all of us. Timber Rock protects its own." In the following days, security measures were quietly implemented. The sheriff deputized several men to keep extra watch. The women organized a schedule so Eleanor was never alone. Even the older students appointed themselves guardians, walking her to and from school. 3 weeks later, another letter from Martha brought relief. Vincent Crane had confessed to multiple crimes to avoid hanging, implicating the last of Celeste's network. The federal marshals had rounded up the remaining fugitives. The Lily tattoo bounties were officially canceled. "It's over," Eleanor whispered, reading the letter for the 3rd time. "Almost," Thatcher corrected. He'd been mysterious all evening, and now he led her to the forge. "I have something for you." On his workbench sat an intricate iron sculpture, a lily, but not like her mark. This one bloomed upward, its petals open to the sky, stem strong despite decorative thorns. At its base, smaller flowers budded, promising future blooms. "I've been thinking about what marks mean," he said, watching her face. "Seems to me, if someone forced a mark on you, you have the right to reclaim it, transform it." Eleanor traced the iron petals, tears sliding down her cheeks. "It's beautiful. It's yours. For the garden, maybe, or the school. Wherever you want to put it." He wrapped his arms around her from behind, hands gentle on her belly. "That lily on your shoulder, it tried to mean ownership. But look what grew from that dark soil, a teacher, a wife, a mother, a woman who fought back and won." She turned in his arms. "I love you, and I love you, all of you, past included." That night, Eleanor stood in her garden, looking at where she'd plant Thatcher's lily sculpture. The stars were bright above Timber Rock, the air cool with approaching autumn. Inside her, the baby moved, life asserting itself despite everything that had tried to destroy it. She thought of Violet Beauchamp, that frightened girl with a fresh tattoo and no hope. That girl was gone, but not erased. She'd transformed into Eleanor Reed, teacher, survivor, defender of justice. The lily remained on her shoulder, would always remain. But its meaning had changed. Once it had marked property, now it marked strength. Once it had meant captivity, now it proclaimed freedom. Once it had bound her to the past, now it reminded her how far she'd come. Chapter 2. She whispered to the night, remembering her promise to tell her child their story someday, starting from when life truly began. This is Chapter 2. Inside the house, Thatcher was banking the fire, preparing for bed. Tomorrow she'd teach eager minds. Tomorrow the town would go about its business, with her as part of its fabric rather than an outsider. Tomorrow the past would be a little further away. But tonight, Eleanor Reed stood in her garden, free and unafraid, a woman who'd refused to let others write her story. The lily might bloom forever on her shoulder, but she'd chosen what it meant, and that made all the difference. Spring arrived in Timber Rock with a parade of wildflowers and the annual Founders' Day celebration. Eleanor watched from the schoolhouse window as townspeople hung lanterns and set up booths along Main Street. Her students fidgeted with excitement. Lessons were hard to focus on with festivities brewing outside. "All right," she conceded, closing her book. "Let's practice your recitation one more time. Then you're dismissed early?" A chorus of cheers erupted. The children had been preparing a special poem for the festival, written collectively about their town and what it meant to them. Lucy Morrison stood to lead them, her clear voice carrying through the room. "In mountains high where eagles soar, where pine trees whisper ancient lore, stands Timber Rock, our home so dear, where all who seek new life draw near." Eleanor's hand rested on her rounded belly as she listened. 7 months along now. She felt the baby respond to the young voices with gentle movements. Thatcher had already started crafting a cradle in his forge, humming as he worked the wood and iron together. After dismissing the children, Eleanor made her way slowly through town. The transformation over the past months had been remarkable, not just in her acceptance, but in how the community had grown. New families arrived weekly, drawn by news of the thriving school and inclusive atmosphere. "Mrs. Reed," Mayor Garrett hailed her. "Just the person I wanted to see. We're hoping you'll give a reading tonight at the festival, something uplifting for the community. I'd be honored." "Mayor." "Excellent. 8 o'clock at the pavilion." He paused, his weathered face growing serious. "You know, my boys have become different children since you returned. Tom's talking about college now. Never thought I'd see the day." Eleanor smiled. "He has a sharp mind. With proper support, he could go far. That's just it. You see potential where others see problems. That's a gift, Mrs. Reed. One this town needed." As evening fell, Lanterns transformed Main Street into a river of golden light. The whole town gathered, families spreading blankets on the grass, young couples strolling hand in hand, children racing between booths with sticky fingers from candied apples. Eleanor found Thatcher at their designated spot near the pavilion. He'd spread a quilt and helped her settle comfortably, his protective hovering both endearing and slightly amusing. "I'm pregnant, not porcelain," she reminded him as he adjusted a cushion behind her back for the third time. "Humor me," he replied, kissing her temple. "I'm practicing my fathering skills." The evening's program began with the children's recitation. Eleanor watched with pride as her students performed flawlessly, their voices blending in harmony. When they finished, the applause was thunderous. Mrs. Pritchard took the stage next, reading from the town's founding charter with dramatic flair. Father Miguel offered a blessing for continued prosperity. Then Mayor Garrett called Eleanor forward. The walk to the podium seemed long, all eyes upon her. She'd chosen to read a passage from Elizabeth Barrett Browning, but as she looked out at the faces, her students, their parents, the merchants and workers and families that made up this community, different words came to her lips. "I had prepared to read a poem about love transforming all things," she began. "But standing here, I realize I want to share something else, something true." A murmur rippled through the crowd, but it was curious rather than hostile. "When I first came to Timber Rock, I was running from a past that marked me, from mistakes not of my making, from a world that tried to define my worth by standards I never chose." She paused, finding Thatcher's steady gaze in the crowd. "I expected to hide here, to disappear. Instead, I found something I never dared hope for. Home." The lantern light flickered across attentive faces as Eleanor continued. "This town teaches lessons no book can contain. It teaches that people can change, that second chances aren't just words, but actions. It shows that community isn't about where you were born or what brought you here, but what you choose to build together." She placed a hand on her belly. "My child will be born here, will grow up running these same streets where your children play. They'll learn arithmetic in the same schoolhouse, ring the same church bell on Sunday mornings, know the same mountains that stand guard over us all." Eleanor's voice grew stronger. "Some say the frontier is dying, that civilization means forgetting what these small towns represent. But I say Timber Rock proves them wrong. We are the true civilization, not because we're perfect, but because we choose to see each other as more than our worst moments or darkest hours." She looked directly at several faces. Mrs. Pritchard, who'd gone from suspicion to fierce protection. The Garrett boys, no longer wild but focused. The Morrison family, whose acceptance had meant everything. My past will always be part of me, but here, I learned it doesn't have to define me. That's the gift Timber Rock gives, the chance to write new chapters, to grow beyond what we were into what we can become. The silence when she finished was profound. Then Tom Garrett began clapping, followed by his brother, then the other students. Soon the entire gathering was on their feet, applause echoing off the mountains. Eleanor made her way back to Thatcher, tears streaming down her face. He wrapped her in his arms, whispering words of love and pride that only she could hear. The festival continued late into the night. Music spilled from the pavilion where couples danced. Children chased fireflies between the booths. Stories were shared, bonds strengthened, community celebrated. As they prepared to leave, a young woman approached hesitantly. She was new to town, Eleanor realized, recognizing the uncertain posture of someone unsure of their welcome. "Mrs. Reed, I'm Catherine Walsh. I just arrived from Denver. I heard your speech and I wondered." She paused, gathering courage. "I'm also running from something, made choices I'm not proud of. Do you think, is there room here for someone like me?" Eleanor took the woman's hands. "There's room for anyone willing to work, to contribute, to become part of what we're building. Come to the schoolhouse tomorrow. We'll talk about what skills you have, what you might offer." Catherine's relief was palpable. Thank you, as she walked away. Thatcher squeezed Eleanor's shoulder. creating more happy endings, paying forward what was given to me. Eleanor corrected, "Isn't that what community means?" They walked home through streets still glowing with lantern light. Inside their house, expanded now with a nursery waiting for its occupant, Eleanor sat while Thatcher rubbed her aching feet. "I've been thinking about what you'll tell our child," he said quietly. "About your past, about the mark." Eleanor had been thinking about it too. The truth, when they're old enough to understand that sometimes people hurt us in ways that leave scars. But scars can be proof of survival, not shame. That marks others put on us don't have to become who we are. And if they ask why you stayed when Crane threatened you, why you didn't run, then I'll tell them that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to stand firm for what matters despite that fear. She smiled softly. I'll tell them their father taught me that this town taught me that. Thatcher moved to sit beside her, hand gentle on her belly. Feel that? Babies dancing again. Probably heard the music from the festival. Eleanor covered his hand with hers. Do you think we're giving them a good life? A safe one? I think we're giving them a chance to grow up in a place that understands redemption, that values courage over conformity, that judges people by their choices, not their circumstances. He kissed her softly. I think we're giving them the childhood you should have had. Later, as Eleanor prepared for bed, she stood before the mirror, unbuttoning her dress. The lily tattoo was visible on her shoulder, darker than her skin, intricate in its cruel beauty. She traced it absently, thinking of all the meanings it had carried. Property, shame, survival, defiance, victory. Now, carrying new life. She saw it differently again. It was history written on skin, not erasable, but transformable. Her child would see it someday, ask questions, and Eleanor would answer honestly, teaching them that marks of the past need not dictate the future. Coming to bed, Thatcher called. In a moment. She moved to the window, looking out at Timber Rock settling into sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, students to teach, a newcomer to help integrate, a baby growing ever closer to arrival. But tonight, she felt only gratitude. The girl who'd fled New Orleans in terror was gone. The woman who'd arrived in Timber Rock seeking invisibility had evolved. In her place stood Eleanor Reed, teacher, wife, soon-to-be mother, defender of second chances. The iron lily Thatcher had crafted stood in her garden now, caught in moonlight, unlike the mark on her shoulder. This lily reached skyward, its metal petals open to possibility. At its base, real lilies had begun to grow, planted by her students as a surprise. Life surrounding art, beauty emerging from symbolic pain. Chapter 2 continues. Eleanor whispered to the night, hand on her belly. And what a story it's becoming. She closed the curtains and joined her husband, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. In Timber Rock, surrounded by mountains and community and love, Eleanor Reed had finally stopped running. She'd found something worth standing still for, worth fighting for, worth building upon. The lily on her shoulder would always remind her of where she'd been, but the life growing inside her, the students who called her name with affection, the town that had become family, these proclaimed where she was going, and that destination looked beautiful indeed. We survived, she murmured as sleep took her, Thatcher's arms secure around her. Now we get to live. In the distance, a night bird called, its song carrying across the valley. The mountains stood eternal guard, and in a house built by love and determination, two souls who'd found each other against all odds dreamed of the future they were creating, one day at a time. The past was written, but the future, the future was a blank page waiting to be filled with whatever story they chose to write. And Eleanor Reed, teacher and survivor, mother and fighter, woman of courage and grace, could hardly wait to see what words would fill those pages. Thank you for joining me on Eleanor and Thatcher's journey through the Wild West. Where are you listening to this story from? I'd love to hear from listeners around the world in the comments below. Please subscribe to From Wild West for more tales of courage, redemption, and love in the American frontier, and share your thoughts about Eleanor's transformation. What part of her story touched you the most?